Cuba gave Trump 2,000 prisoners. Not one of them was the right person. And what happened in the 24 hours after that deadline passed should concern every person watching this. On April 10th, American officials sat in a room in Havana and delivered a private ultimatum. 14 days. Release 3 specific political prisoners by name. A rapper who led protests in the streets of Havana. A journalist sentenced to 7 years for criticizing the government online. An artist arrested in his own studio for painting murals that called for democracy. The deadline was April 24th. The State Department called these cases non-negotiable. And if you think Cuba simply refused, you are about to find out why what actually happened is far more calculated than a refusal. If this kind of daily analysis gives you something the headlines are missing, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it determines whether this reaches the people who need to see it. On April 22nd, Cuba announced what it called a humanitarian and sovereign gesture, a mass pardon. 2010 inmates released. Human rights organizations in Miami reviewed every name on that list. 0 political prisoners. The 3 names Washington demanded were not there, not one. The inmates Cuba released were described by Havana as low-level offenders convicted of non-political crimes. Many had already served most of their sentences. Cuba gave back 2,010 people it did not need and kept the 3 it could not afford to lose. That is not defiance. That is a negotiating move dressed as compliance. And the question you should be asking is why those 3 specific people are so dangerous to a government that has survived for 66 years. Here is the answer. Releasing a rapper who organized street protests, a journalist who published dissent, an artist who painted democracy on public walls, that does not free 3 people. It legitimizes what they did. It tells every Cuban still inside that country that challenging the system is acceptable, that organized opposition has value. Cuba has spent 66 years proving the opposite. Every structural concession cracks the foundation. So Havana released 2,010 operational prisoners, people whose freedom costs the regime nothing, and held the 3 structural ones whose release would cost everything. That distinction, operational versus structural, is the entire logic of how this government survives pressure. And Washington either understands that distinction or it does not. Keep watching, because what the Pentagon did next suggests it does. 24 hours after the deadline passed, Cuban state television aired something it has not broadcast since 2019, live-fire military drills on the northern coast. Troops in formation, anti-aircraft batteries repositioned near the waterfront. A Cuban general appeared on camera to announce defensive readiness. The timing was deliberate. Broadcasting military exercises the morning after ignoring a presidential ultimatum is not a coincidence. It is a signal to Washington and to the Cuban population simultaneously. To Washington, it says we chose defiance and we are prepared for consequences. To the Cuban people who are living through 18-hour daily blackouts in eastern provinces, it says the revolution still has teeth. Whether those people had electricity to watch the broadcast is a different question entirely. The Pentagon did not wait. Satellite imagery analyzed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies showed reinforcements arriving at Guantanamo Bay within 24 hours of Cuba's refusal. Additional personnel carriers, expanded perimeter security, a significant increase in helicopter activity along the fence line. P-8 Poseidon surveillance flights over the Florida Straits have doubled since March. Naval assets in the region have not repositioned yet. But analysts note that moving forces in the Caribbean takes hours, not weeks. The assets are already close enough. Rubio called Cuba's prisoner release a charade and promised consequences. He did not say what they would be. The State Department said only that the United States is evaluating its next steps. Russia's foreign minister warned that any military action against Cuba would be viewed as aggression. He did not elaborate on what Russia's response would be. He did not need to. Now, here is the part that does not make the headlines. Both governments may be getting exactly what they want from this confrontation. Trump gets to look decisive on Cuba. The ultimatum, the military reinforcement, the public deadline, all of it plays directly to Cuban-American voters in Florida. Whether Cuba complies is almost secondary. The pressure itself is the political product, and Cuba's government gets an external enemy. When food runs out and power grids collapse, Havana blames Washington. The military drills become proof that the revolution is still fighting. The ultimatum becomes evidence of American imperialism. Diaz-Canel needs this confrontation as much as Trump does. Neither side has a structural incentive to back down. And that is exactly where the danger lives. Not in a planned confrontation, in an unplanned one. A protest that turns violent, an incident at Guantanamo's perimeter, a refugee boat that sinks in front of cameras. Any of these forces a response that neither government planned for and neither can politically survive ignoring. Cuba's foreign minister called the ultimatum imperial arrogance, then added one word that caught immediate attention in Washington. He said Cuba remained open to respectful dialogue. That word, respectful, is the identical language Cuban diplomats used in 2014, the year before the Obama normalization began. It is the word a government uses when it wants a channel kept open while publicly refusing to walk through it. Mexico offered to mediate. Neither government accepted. The European Union urged a return to negotiations. No meeting is scheduled. The diplomatic architecture has not collapsed. It has simply gone quiet. And in the history of this specific conflict, quiet has always meant something is moving underneath. What we know with certainty is this. Trump demanded 3 prisoners. Cuba released 2010 different ones. The deadline passed. Guantanamo was reinforced within 24 hours. Military drills aired on Cuban state television for the first time in 6 years. Surveillance flights have doubled. No further diplomatic meetings are on the calendar. Rubio promised consequences and declined to name them. And the 3 people behind those prison doors, the rapper, the journalist, the artist, remain exactly where they were on April 10th when the ultimatum was delivered. What we do not know is whether the consequences Washington is evaluating arrive as sanctions, as military action, or as something between the two that has not yet been named. We do not know whether Cuba's 2010 gambit bought time or burned the last of Washington's patience. And we do not know whether those 3 names are the actual hill both governments are willing to fight on, or whether they were always just the pretext for a confrontation that was coming regardless of who was on the list. Cuba answered a demand for 3 specific people with 2,000 wrong ones and a firing range on state television. That is not a failed negotiation. That is a government telling you precisely what it values, precisely what it fears losing, and precisely how far it will go to protect it. The question is whether Washington is listening to the answer or simply waiting to deliver the next demand. Here is my question for you today. Did Cuba's 2010 gambit buy it time, or did it guarantee that whatever comes next is far worse? Does a government that gives back everything except the one thing demanded deserve to be called cooperative or defiant? Drop your answer in the comments. The most interesting responses always come from people who can hold both sides of that argument at once. If this daily analysis is giving you clarity that the mainstream coverage is not, hit the like button. Share this with one person following the Cuba crisis. It is the single action that decides whether this analysis reaches the audience that needs it or disappears into the algorithm. We cover this every day as new information breaks, because in a situation moving this fast, daily is the only pace that keeps you ahead of it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. 21 chapters in, 3 names still behind bars. The next move is being made right now.